My name's Rob O'Dwyer, Chief Network Officer at Smart Maritime Network. We did organise to have drinks for the final session. It is after 5 o'clock. It seems to have been a terrible idea, the way it's worked out so far. The plan here for this final session, if you do actually start to listen now momentarily, is to have these gentlemen here on the panel entertain you over a drink for the last 40 minutes or so of the conference. They're going to be reciting some of the material from their respective Netflix comedy specials, particularly focused on maritime. But we're going to be looking at the topic of data sharing and collaboration, particularly with reference to our Smart Maritime Council. And if you stay through the whole thing, after this one drink, you'll be rewarded with our beer and wine reception VIP in the Tivoli Gardens, which is closed to the public for ourselves for the rest of the evening. So thank you. With a little quiet now, we are ready to proceed. Just to explain a little bit about where we're coming from as the Smart Maritime Council. It's a membership group consisting of a range of diverse maritime stakeholders, and we hold regular meetings to determine how all of these different companies can work together and collaborate a little better to improve the digital capabilities of the sector for all of us. We look at how members can align on things like standards, interoperability of different systems, data formats, ways of allowing information to flow more easily across the shipping ecosystem and increase the efficiency of the supply chain. I have the privilege of being the chairman of this group, so I try and keep some control and get them to talk politely to each other as much as possible. We've got a nice mix of representatives on there, as you can see on the slide. We have from all corners of the industry, vessel owners and managers. We have technology providers, finance, legal, insurance, class societies, and I think that's a very important point, that we have those diverse perspectives, different viewpoints to really make any significant progress, because efficiency in the industry does affect everybody and can only really move forward if we do work together. To date, we've discussed some different projects to improve access to digital data in shipboard operations. We've looked at the creation of a standardized set of noon report data formats built on ISO standards. We've also discussed the data ownership issue, which Giampiero was talking about with his roundtable earlier, how to have best practice guidelines for equipment manufacturers and vessel operators as to how data is owned and accessed from shipboard machinery. We're also looking at the digital certificate issue as well and trying to set up a working group there to see how we could better promote the use of digital documentation to replace paper during port calls. Ultimately, the idea is to get more towards this. The companies that are on the Smart Maritime Council and the companies here today generally are in agreement with this kind of idea that we need to be able to share data. The access to accurate and timely data is absolutely fundamental to improving the efficiency of the supply chain of the maritime industry and is of benefit to all of us. From a technical standpoint, much of this is relatively straightforward. Where we struggle an awful lot is on the political side and getting people to agree on some of these fundamental elements. But that's what the group is all about. We're lucky to have an enthusiastic group who are willing to talk about these issues, and hopefully working together we can make some progress. So enough from me. What we'd like to do now is get on to talking to our panel here. I won't do the long intros again to keep you too much further from the drinks afterwards. You can see the names and companies up here on the screen. My colleague at the end there, John Harrison, does have to leave a little early. There's a massive contract waiting for him at the other end of a flight, so he's going to get out of here to get his huge bonus sorted out. So rather than doing introductions, guys, I'm going to start with the first question on the list. We had a preparatory call for this last week and discussed some of these issues. It went on for longer than an hour, so we're going to try and keep it a little more concise this time. Our companies here, we have people working in satellite and industrial computing and industries outside of maritime, and we spoke a bit about the technology stack and how other industries do a better job of supporting data exchange, standardized formats, and are there things that we can learn in maritime for what other industries have done in integrating technologies. So John, I'm going to start with you with this first question that I have. How have you seen market forces in the satellite industry push companies towards standardization or agreement on interoperability? And do you think the experiences you've seen in satellite in particular could provide any lessons for us to learn in maritime and how we can do better in interoperability of technology systems? You probably turned it off, did you?
Testing? No, there we
There you
go.
go.
Yeah. I didn't touch anything. Yeah, good question, realistically. So, a bit of background. We make stuff. We make VSAT terminals, which basically take this fabulous data from the satellites. And, I'll be pretty honest. I've been doing this all my life, 30-odd years. I'm quite old these days. And it's been pretty dull, to be fair. The satellite constellations have been the same. They've worked very well. They continue to work very well. But I guess because of data demand, several years ago, we had to do things a bit differently. And I think that was amplified during, COVID. The data demand on board the vessel just went bonkers. So as a manufacturer, we've had to, do things a little bit differently. So I think that the drivers are the habits of us, shoreside. We all like to be connected. We like, we've been talking about big data. Well, we have our own big data, right? So we like to be connected. We like our devices to be connected. We like to get our Netflix. We like to get things now. And those habits are, why should it be any different at sea? And that's a challenge. So obviously there has been a driver in terms of, I put it into 3 buckets: enterprise, safety, security, and welfare. And we've spoken about that earlier, weren't we? So I think definitely, welfare, crew mental health has been a big driver. We've seen, our partners who do the connectivity part, the SLAs, the service level agreements, have gone from here to here overnight, and I think that's, partly due to, COVID, etc. So yeah, it's exciting. The convergent technologies, I'm not sure if anybody here has been kind of following the space technology, but these convergent technologies are really cool right now. But there was always a concept. Now there's a need. So you're about to see some really cool stuff happening. These new constellations of satellite, these big mesh networks are coming to us. It will be a hybrid solution, so you'll see the long-standing, well-proven, superb in terms of stability geo networks, but bolstered by this new stuff that's coming. So absolutely, I think, to answer your question, the habits of us as human beings, and that's been, mirrored over to the seafarer, has definitely driven this demand for not just, it's not about bandwidth, it's just better quality of service. So yeah, definitely.
On the interoperability side, I'm thinking of things like, for example, KU band VSAT. You can have different operators, but you can have an antenna that can work across different satellite networks once it's in the same frequency band, because that is the standard. When you get into this idea of multiple networks in different orbits, that kind of thing, will the shipping industry accept a situation where you can't use one terminal with different networks, or are we going to be pushed into this interoperability side of things on the technology?
That's the challenge. I would say 10 years ago, us as manufacturers, we used to really, go on about the terminals and what they look like and the standards. The ship owner and the user, they just don't care, right? Today, it just has to work, right? So that's the challenge. The ship owner is an asset they have to buy. And hopefully, in their ideal world, they'll be able to leverage spare capacity on network A, B, or C without changing the terminal. And that's what we're heading towards. And I think that's important. And we, as an antenna manufacturer, we have a duty to make that happen. It is challenging because you're not dealing with multiple frequencies, which we've overcome. You're dealing with multiple constellations. You're dealing with, geostationary satellites, and then you're dealing with LEO, MEO. We've all heard the buzzwords in the room, right? And it's a challenge because we have to track it. But will the user accept anything less than having a terminal that will be multi-use? No. So that's happening, basically.
I'm going to skip over Giampiero and stay on the satellite team just with Andrew on a similar idea. With you guys working with modem technologies and network infrastructure, standards and interoperability are fundamental to that, to be able to connect different people. From what's happening in satellite, can we extend that a little bit further into the data infrastructure of the industry and maybe make it a little bit smoother for different types of data to be shared among different stakeholders?
Yes, well, I think, let me build on what John actually said, and what our company does is we we build stuff also, right? We build the stuff that goes in the rack down below decks that actually creates the pipe that goes over the terminals that John's company makes. And we've sort of seen two things with regard to that interoperability piece that we're working on. One is, as John noted, a proliferation of frequency bands and constellations that are now becoming accessible. So from our perspective, it's about designing technology that can access all of those, working with the antenna, because the modem itself has to talk to the antenna and has to be able to talk and tell where it's supposed to point and what it's supposed to do. But the other piece of the puzzle is, as a satellite industry as a whole, we've often been sort of a marginalized bolt-on piece, and not just in maritime where you need satellite connectivity, but in other parts of the world, on land, for example, where there isn't terrestrial connectivity. Satellite's always been sort of a fairly difficult to integrate piece of the puzzle, but a required piece of the puzzle. But what we're doing now is we're very much taking our lessons from the mobile cellular environment, and particularly the standardization that comes around 5G and standards within the 3GPP environment, and adopting that into satellite. So what that means, and I think where it's relevant here, is it's enabling standardization between networks and around translating quality of service across networks. I think Vodafone did a study a couple of years ago that suggested that in commercial shipping, ships were about 40% of the time in port or within range of 3G and LTE networks, right? So how do you pull all of that together, cellular, terrestrial cellular, perhaps WiMAX in port, satellite, and deliver a quality of service across that? And it's by following standards that work across all of those different access networks. And so that's really, I'd say, a big mega trend that's pushing our part of the business.
And following over from what John said, do you think customer demand is going that way? The ability to have options to choose between different communications pipes when you're making a voyage?
I think everybody wants options, but what you're looking for is, in my opinion, reliability and resiliency, and being able to, we talk about, pent-up. We were talking at our table today about pent-up demand. How do you release pent-up demand? We know it, whether you want to download, Netflix or whatever. Demographically, people want to be connected wherever they are. So you need to be able to provide options, but it's about delivering enough throughput economically and delivering a quality of service, a quality of experience wherever you are. And that's going to mean having access to more than one network.
Okay. Benji, I'm going to come to you next. When we were speaking together as a group, we talked about this idea of the technology stack, the idea of the communications layer, then with the IT network layer, which is what you guys do, and then the applications go on top of that, get more specific with maritime, which is what Giampiero does. I mean, in terms of this interoperability idea and standardized technology idea, in industrial computing that exists, right? I mean, the ability to have computing standards, things like HTTP, USB, the world works on these standards.
It does, yeah. And look, so I work for Dell. I also make stuff, and we make stuff, and we make stuff. We all make stuff, but we also make stuff that becomes part of other stuff, right? And then the stuff that you make actually is of that other appliance then becomes very reliable on the stuff we make. And the interesting part of this is the more mainstream this is. You taking off, John? Take it easy. Thank you. Have a good flight.
Big wave for John, everybody.
The more mainstream we make it, the better, because the better it is for our end customers. And then also the industry that I'm part of would have never made it this far if there weren't any standards. Imagine you would go on the internet and exchanging some kind of IP address, but then on another part of the world doing that in a whole different format. You cannot even think about those stuff. That is just because a group of persons came together and and said, let's just do it this way with the TCP/IP protocol, and that is the norm. And I know that came from a different era when this was, it was driven back then by defense industries, and the world was in a different status. But standardization that kept on evolving. So the IT industry, and with that also the OT industry, would have never made it this far. So that doesn't say that it's not possible to implement, right? There are a lot of the big IT versus OT conversation. It's less complicated now than it was 5 years ago. We might not see it yet, but there's a whole lot, I want to keep it a bit positive. There's a whole lot of things going on that are suddenly making their way down. And the IT industry can learn from the OT, the operational technology specifications and the specific needs in this industry. And there's also a vice versa. The OT industry can perhaps learn something from the ever ongoing conversation, and it's very normal to talk about something and then discuss it with let's call it a competitor, and say, if we don't fix this thing, if we don't sort this out, this new protocol, it will never have any adoption. So make change a standard.
If we head then the next layer in our stack, we have our reasonably standardized interoperable communications layer, our fairly well standardized industrial computing layer, network layer, and then we get to the maritime application layer on top of that, where our standards seem to fall apart a little bit, Giampiero. Will I just wind you up and let you go on this one?
Yeah, well, you've heard me enough. I've been an advocate for standardization in IT for 33 years. Failed miserably. Essentially, it doesn't work. People don't want standards. Companies don't want standards because it allows them to do what I said before, blackmail, or use basically their tools and then try to basically be unique. Standardization, there is no digitalization without standardization. We are fooling ourselves. We are talking about digitalizations. We are 20 years behind anybody else. And we continue to be behind because there simply is no willingness, because digitalization is transparency. And this industry is not transparent in a lot of ways. Not in Europe very much. But remember, in Europe we are one very, not even I would say big fraction of the shipping world. The shipping world is absolutely everywhere. As I said before, there are 24,000 shipping companies in the world. 12,000, half of them have one ship. 175 shipping companies, which only have 12,000 ships, but have more than 51 ships each. So what do? We all go for them. What do? They go fishing with us. They're not interested in making things better because they have, sometimes a very enjoyable ride, like in this period, not the cruise companies, of course, and sometimes a very tough ride. We always say we have a 10 years crisis in shipping. The reason is, every 10 years, ship owners make the same mistake all over again. And they simply don't learn anything from the mistakes that they made 10 years before. I'm 68, I don't give a shit about anything anymore. I can tell even the ship owners what I think of them. But at the same time, if we really want to do something the right way, well, we have to follow the Japanese. Japanese are, 5 years ago, organized by Kathy and Rob. They started Digital Ship Tokyo. I went there and talked about, how standardization was needed and how ships were going to be automated and unmanned. Believe me, I could have spoken about Playboy, it would have been the same thing. Actually, it would have been better. They were absolutely blank, people staring at me, blank stares, nobody understood what I was talking about. 1 year later, same thing. 1 year later, they started to have the presentation of the ideas that they had. The last one, in 2019, they wiped us out. They leapfrogged all of Europe They standardize everything. They involved ISO. They involved the Japanese Association of Ship Owners, the Association of Shipbuilders. They had everything laid out. But even the Japanese, God bless them, they did everything on their own, not try to involve the Norwegians, the Germans, etc. And this is the problem in shipping. We all are individual, trying to do things our own way, and if Wärtsilä decides one way, then MAN will go the other way, and Kongsberg the other way, and everybody the other way. And this is an issue. So I'm happy that communication is going the right way, but we don't follow through.
Do you think this issue that you talked about shipping companies being able to fish among providers, that they can just get people to provide customized solutions for them because they have that market power, prevents them being required to work together and talk about this idea of standards, that they don't need it because they'll just get somebody to do the work to customize to whatever system they have themselves?
Yeah, this is another thing. Can you imagine General Motors coming out today and say, you know, we don't like SAP, we don't like Oracle, we don't like Microsoft. We are going to build our own operating system. We are going to build everything ourselves because everything else is shit, except what we build. This is shipping. In shipping, everybody says, we don't like what is existing, we're going to build it ourselves. What happens? Hundreds of different systems. Look at performance today. In the space of 2 years, we went from 3 companies have performance solutions into more than 60 for a market of 150 companies who will want to buy it. What will happen? Millions being thrown in the rubbish bin. And this is exactly what happens every time. And you know, I have fun now in coming to, even with a broken leg, I come to the exhibition, but the reason is that if I had stayed home a little bit more, my wife would have broken me the other leg. Got so fed up about me being home, staying in bed, you know, with a broken leg. But this is it. You know, we have to standardize things. We have to cooperate. Cooperation doesn't exist in IT and shipping. It doesn't exist. Let's face it. Okay? Even when I try to involve my competitors, and I told them, I've created a protocol, let's build the databases of the plant maintenance databases, all of us the same way. You know what the reply was? Can I do it? That was it.
Yeah, let's come on, you can't be just you all the time.
Oh, no. So yeah, so one thing that we have seen in the IT industry is that, you know, we're dealing with open source. So the best thing that you can do is to have an open source protocol that everybody can add to as a community. You build a community and you build something with an open source. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that it's all free, because if you kind of this is a tip, if you also for the software players. It is if you build on an open source protocol, on an open source kind of called a stack, you can still create services, not to get too technical, but you can still create services that could be very specific to your solution of your company that would, you know, stand out from the rest. So that way the industry knows that you can be trusted because everybody is kind of following the same open source spiel, kind of in the same open source play, and you can build on top of that. So that might be, and we've seen that because that was the only way in the IT industry, also in the IoT industry, that people were kind of willing to work together. And that's also why, you know, Dell and IBM and Cisco and HP and Lenovo were all in one room, kind of thinking about those protocols. So it could be an option there.
I think part of the issue is that when you talk to one person from any of those companies in maritime, they will agree with the logic as you put it forward until it comes to the time of actually making a corporate decision of the whole management and moving forward on it. Then suddenly things will go quite quiet.
Yeah, one thing on that, and then I'll hand over to Andrew. But we don't have that long. Eventually something, you know, what I mentioned earlier, the audience will not take this any longer. Our public, our end customer at the end, and again, this is not the consumer, but there's different end customers, something's got to give. So we don't have that time in the industry. So, and that's also the reason why this standardization in IT continues to happen. It's because the companies generally believe in it, But it's also that my end customers, our end customers, won't take no for an answer. It's just they will draw the line. There's nothing like that. So,
Andrew, kind of following on the same point, we mentioned during our call together, preparing for the panel, this slogan of what's the why? I mean, how do we create the motivation in the industry to follow some of these obvious and logical steps to follow through with the digitalisation, to make those investments, to talk to each other? It needs to be clear and obvious to people that the benefit is there for them to follow. Any ideas how we can do that?
Well, that's a good question. But I mean, I think, and again, this is something we were talking at our roundtable session today. There needs to be a really compelling need to affect that change. And you know, when the oil price is low and tanker rates are high, then there's not so much compelling need. But when things flip around, then maybe there's more of a driving need. But I think, you know, that standardization, and we see it, again, we were talking about how in our part of the business we're working to standardize towards terrestrial cellular standards. You know, we only sort of deliver the data. We don't really have let's say, you know, a skin in the game in terms of what the data looks like or how it's compatible with other bits. But you know, we are being driven ourselves to standardize or to create you know, universal hardware and software in our business that works across networks. Because again, in satellite networks today, you can sort of work across networks from a standardization standpoint, but from a hardware standpoint or a waveform, which is sort of, you know, how the information gets delivered over the satellite, there's still a lot of proprietary, pretty much everything is proprietary. And so how do we get there? Well, I think Benjamin sort of implied, you know, our customers are dragging us there, but we're going to have to do that because ultimately it's actually going to make things more economical for everybody, and in fact make it more accessible for everybody as well. And for, you know, from our standpoint, you know, we're going to have to adhere to that, but I don't think anybody says it's easy.
So the benefits are there for you as a company, but it's the customer and demand that forces you to make the step and to do it at the particular time that you do it.
I mean, we recognize it. At least the impact in our part of the business. It's also, it's not easy from a technology standpoint. I mean, it's possible. It is possible and it will happen, but it's not. You can't just sort of, oh yeah, we were holding back and now we're going to make it happen. No, it takes quite a lot of development and investment, but we will get there. But it's not something that takes place overnight.
Now you've all had a drink. If anyone's feeling more relaxed and wants to ask a difficult question, please feel free to stick your hand up, make a comment or whatever. But I'll come back to Giampiero in the meantime. A famous philosopher once said, the only way to grow is to make ourselves less specific. That was Benjamin when we had the call the other day. Maritime likes to think of itself as special. How do we convince people they're not special after all in this industry and should be using technology just like other industries do? That one's basically set up for you, isn't it?
Kalashnikov. You basically pointed at them and say, you're not specific. If you don't agree, I kill you. It's... there is one thing I want to say. Shipping has been an art which is as old as mankind, essentially. Sometimes I joke about the fact that we all know what the oldest job is. Well, the second oldest one is sailing. That's why shipping is full of some of not good ladies, let's say. But the fact is that it's a very, very old activity. And it has progressed based on very specific skills. You had captains who 100 years ago used to go, 150 years ago, used to go from London to Melbourne, you know, literally using a sort of a sextant. Now, we know that in the antiquity, I don't know if you have a passion for antiquities and antique things, but I do, and you know, I hope you have heard about the Antikythera mechanism. None of you knows about it? It's a 2,500 years old computer, which has been found sunk in the Aegean waters. It's absolutely phenomenal. Have a look at it. We think that 2,500 years ago they were going around, you know, by saying we probably are between Greenland and United States. In reality, they had very big instrumentation, but still, it required very big skills to sail. Even 40 years ago, I started using Decca and Lauren to navigate. You know, I'm an engineer, but of course I used to sail, so I used to do navigation a bit, sail on sailing ships. Now, you don't need a captain, you don't need a chief engineer, you don't need anybody on board. And certainly, you don't need the skills of a captain. And if there are some captains, I apologize because for me as a sailor, captain is close to God. Actually, he's a little bit above, okay? But, sorry. The fact is that we don't need those skills anymore. I can build you a ship today. I could have built it actually we built it 30 years ago, a ship that could sail by itself. And to do it today is so simple, it's just so cheap, that it is mind-boggling to me. So we have to change our mindset. Because it's different. Now what do? We transport goods from A to B with some propellers and an engine on a steel thing that floats, hopefully. We don't need anything else. We don't need stars. We don't need anything else. We input the route, and goodbye, Charlie, ship, I'll see you on the other side. So things are changing. And the fact that we don't notice it, well, first of all, it's a phenomenal opportunity for whoever will. I hope the Jeff Bezos, as we discussed very many times, who one day will say, how much does it cost me to build 100 ships? And they will say, that was going to cost you 10 billion. And I said, 10 billion? That's how much money I made yesterday. So let's do it. Okay? And then all the others will be wiped out. Because this is what happens when people change technologies. Okay? And of course, in shipping, it may be more resilient because we have antiquated laws, we have IMO rules and regulations that state that if you find a ship without anybody on board and you jump on it, it's your ship. So of course, we have to change that. But the reality is this one. We are living in a different world. We are changing. Some things I like, some things I don't like. I started using Mosaic. I started using ARPANET. So I've seen the whole going up of internet and coming down because now it's a bit of a mess. But we need, in shipping, we need to change a little bit. We cannot go on like this. We are doing the same things as 2,000 years ago, and it's impossible, really.
I think we had a comment or question.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Hello, panelists, and hello, everyone. My name is Asit. I am from Most Tankers. I have a question regarding the standardization part that you discussed about. Of course, it makes sense. We all understand that if everything is standardized, then it would add a lot of value. But the million-dollar question is, where would that come from? Who should take the lead on that to start the process?
So, 2006, 15 years ago, myself, Intership Navigation, and I'll try to remember the name, MAN, Yanmar, Alfa Laval, McGregor, and Grimaldi Group, we started to build a standardization to standardize the way we build databases. You know what a database is? A plane maintenance database is all the information so that you can carry out the maintenance. Today, they're all built differently, which means that you cannot run any statistic whatsoever because you're looking for bearings. And if you have written BB, it's different than B bearings, it's different than ball bearings, it's different than B dot, it's different than whatever. So you write it in 100 different ways. You don't get anything out of it. You don't get statistics. You don't get information. You only get useless data. So we said, let's standardize it. Also, another issue. You buy Spectec Amos, or you buy ShipNet, or you buy IB. The day you want to change, you don't change. The day the software becomes obsolete, you don't change, because if you have 250 ships to change database, you kill yourself. So what happens is ship owners have hanged themselves because they never, ever looked. We did conferencing. We went around all over the world. We did everything on our own. When I was CEO of Spectec, I spent 1 million of my own money, let's say, to basically help out. Same did Alfa Laval, same did McGregor, same did everybody else. Who adopted it? 3 companies. 3 companies, okay? Including the FDS here in Denmark, God bless them. So whenever we come, even suppliers come with the idea.
They're coming for you,
Pick me up?
Giampiero. Yeah.
I know. Get worried, you know. Whenever there is an idea, if the ship owners don't follow it, the idea will die. As simple as that.
I think that's the issue. I mean, in Japan, that's one of the successes that they had, that the big 3 shipping companies were involved. And if you look at something like DCSA, which Thomas Bagger spoke about earlier, it's led by the container lines themselves. And you can ask then any provider to provide technology systems based on the standards created by DCSA, and they'll line up out the door to sell it to them. So it needs to be led by the shipping company. If the technology providers come and try to set up the standards, it becomes more complicated because it's seen as a Trojan horse of some description because there's a profit incentive to it. It has to be led by the shipping companies to be successful, I think.
So to answer, the initiative can come from any one of us, but if the ship owners don't follow through, then the initiative dies. Remember what happened with Actis? I mean, Actis was a tremendous act of piracy at the beginning. Companies started to literally buy the charts from the hydrographic institutes, photocopy them. It was the Far West. You had vectorized systems, you had scanned format, and you had everybody doing a different format. It has taken 20 years, the industry, to go back to normality and adopt one standard and one update and so on. This is something that we have to avoid.
Okay, as we're coming to a close now, maybe if Andrew or Ben want to add any final comments on this idea of what we've seen with, I mean, we've seen it in the council of trying to get shipping companies involved in pushing these ideas forward. Do you think that there's hope for us in the future?
Yeah, well, the future is always just a little bit beyond what we can touch, right? So of course there's hope. But I mean, I agree with Giampiero. I mean, even from our standpoint, it is sort of our customers that are getting together and telling our part of the industry what they need. And to your point, I think you're correct as well, right? If one of us sort of steps out, then there's a view that, okay, yeah, maybe there's a Trojan horse behind that or whatever. There's some motivation. So I think it needs to be collective and it needs to be driven by the industry.
Thanks. And Ben, any final words for you as we close up?
A very positive individual, Rob. So PMA, positive mental attitude. I never believe for a moment that you don't care anymore, because you do care, Giampiero. We all care. So I'm not worried about this. I do think the time is now. But I do believe that we have to put in a bit more effort and be tenacious. This is a fantastic word. So be tenacious of what we're doing. Keep on, keep the discussion going, because I've seen it. All this stuff that is happening in the maritime industry, we've seen it before in different industries, but just a little bit behind of the rest. So yeah, we can definitely do it. I think we can. And if we all, say what needs to be said sometimes, and that's actually good, and have eventually our end customer will demand it, and then we better be ready.
Okay, on that positive note, I think we'll leave it there. Skål, everybody. Thank you very much for your attention. Hope you have a great evening. Thank you.